Hi, I'm Anthony Marinelli, and I'd like to cut back to 1981 and show you how I created the FM synthesizer basic tracks for the movie Blue Thunder. And this movie was a big movie in 1981. It was foreshadowing the LA Olympics. It had Roy Scheider in it, who was off of Jaws, fresh off of Jaws, and Malcolm McDowell, who had done A Clockwork Orange, big actors. And I was a kid, in my early 20s, and was performing classical music on synthesizer with my partner Brian Banks, and fortunately the studio heard what we were doing, and John Badham pulled a few things to try to convince them to trust, to trust in us that we could pull this off and create a sound for this movie. And the composer Arthur B. Rubinstein is the one that sort of initiated all of it, and he wanted us to work with him. So we created FM sounds that were the basic tracks for the orchestra to come and play on top of. We used the Synclavir. The Synclavir was basically an FM synthesizer. Back then it didn't have digital sampling, so we weren't recreating the sound of acoustic instruments or anything like that. We were just creating a unique palette of FM sounds, delivering them to Arthur so that he could write for them, and he would hear the sounds at our studio, and then go back to his writing setup, which was on piano, remembering what they sounded like, and writing them on 6-note sketches, and then taking those sketches and piling the orchestra parts on top of them, and then we would play the music off those sketches into the Synclavier. And here's a quick little bit of what it sounded like. So I have multi-tracks here on the Synclavier. And the way I got that to play was by removing the bootload disc, which is the disc that loads the Synclavier and tells the Synclavier, what to do. It tells the computer what to do. It tells the computer to be a Synclavier, basically, with all of its features. So this is the bootload disc. And then I have another floppy disk here that has the sounds on it, and it also has the sequences on it. So you can see this disc has different cues on it: M32A, M12, M33, M40. The first digit means the reel, the platter that the actual film was on, and then the second digit, like 32, the second digit is the 2, means it's the second cue in reel 3. So we're playing sequence number 4, M40, which is movie, reel 4, first cue in reel 4. Please remember to like and subscribe this video. And all the videos, if you are liking them and they're helping you in any way, it will allow us to keep making more. We have a great team and we want to keep going. So I put this disc in, and you can see on the screen, I'm able to choose between the hard drive or the floppy disk. So I'm pulling the sequence off of the floppy, and you can kind of hear it clicking a little bit. Sounds like a little chipmunk or something. Cute little guy. And then loading, and as soon as it's done loading, all the sounds are in the sequencer. And I can solo the tracks and you can start to hear them. Kind of a French horn melody. This is a sound that I would run through a low-pass filter, and then we would print it to multi-track tape. All these sounds had to be printed to multi-track tape so that the orchestra could play on the same tape. And they probably ran 2 different tape machines at the time. One with the synth sounds and one with the orchestra. This would be doubled by contrabasses and cello section. With the expression, vibrato comes in. So we were reading off orchestral scores and, acting like orchestral instruments here with these sounds. Kind of a gong, percussion instrument. And I could show you, I can put one of these sounds on the keyboard by pushing a button. So this is that sound that I would filter. Sounds kind of like raw sawtooths. And then we run it through a System 100, which was a Roland semi-modular, synthesizer, and it had a filter, and it had a flanger and a phase shifter. And then while this was playing from here, where did I find that sound? right there on track 2. We'd be moving the filter and following the score. So it would follow the dynamics, piano, mezzo forte, forte, and it would follow a shape. So when you heard the multitrack back, all these sounds would be extremely expressive. And then that tape would go to the session, and that's where the there was an explosion of things happening. There was the excitement of the first digital sound on an orchestral film, documented by The Hollywood Reporter and Variety back then. Those were the two industry magazines and newspapers that would come out. But also the resistance from a lot of musicians, because they were hearing these tracks being played like on the scoring stage where they were, and wondering, well, what is all that? And we're going to play to that? We don't want to play to that. And how much money are they making? And what's going on here? You know, and they're going to put us out of work because then there's string sounds coming out of these boxes. And it created a lot of turmoil for a lot of years. You know, you have to really put yourself back to those days. Now we just do orchestral mock-ups all the time, and orchestras are fine, and orchestral musicians now have, you know, a lot of times their own little rigs, and they can record themselves and that sort of thing, put effects on their instruments. But back then it was just like, it was creating a lot of problems. It probably took maybe 10 to 15 years to sort of work itself out with the union scales and with the musicians, and sometimes with the directors, you know, that they would be okay, and sometimes they felt like they would have to embrace these electronic sounds and they didn't even want to, but to get the scores made they kind of had to. And that was the thing that Brian Banks and I were good at doing in the early days. Before I was writing my own orchestra scores, we were doing this type of thing for other composers. So we worked with Arthur B. Rubinstein on Blue Thunder. That was the first one, and that's this one. And then on War Games, which was another big movie in the 80s in 1983. And then after that, with Jack Nietzsche on Starman. And I'd love to do a breakdown on that one day. Some of the most unique sounds I've ever put in a film. Mosquitoes in a jar, and vocal sounds, and some sounds that were sampled from The Exorcist from that movie, and we used it in Starman. And then Stand By Me, which was a Rob Reiner film that ended up being done with all like resynthesis sounds. So it's like FM sounds that are based off of samples, and they recreate a sample by using frame synthesis. And that's another thing that I'd like to be able to show you. I mean, I'm so excited to show you these techniques and what it actually sounded like, because both are really valuable, I think, today. The techniques, because you can deploy these techniques now, and also what it sounded like, because you can make these sounds with FM synthesizers. You can make them on DX7s. You can make them on Arturia Synclavier. And I believe there's FM8. There's another like plug-in, and I'm sure there's more. And there's also other hardware units. FM synthesis is really different than subtractive synthesis. It's a type of additive synthesis where you're adding components to make a complex tone rather than subtracting components like you are on an analog synthesizer, using filters to sort of taper off overtones. So they work in opposite directions, but when you put them together, they offer you an even more interesting palette than either one of them. So I would use FM synthesis with analog synthesis to give it more dimension. And there's a lot of ways you can do it, and I'll be doing that in future videos. I'll be doing that. I want to show you how they integrate, and how they integrate very well together. They're sort of born to work together. So I hope you can follow what I'm saying about using a sequencer as a DAW, because we didn't have a DAW back then, and we were able to work within the synthesizer, so to speak, to do all of our pre-production on our recordings. And basically it's called a sequencer, but it sequenced all the notes, and it acted as a DAW. There was no MIDI, it was just the sounds, and I could just quickly call up any sound on the keyboard that's in the recorder. I just find a track, and then you could play it. And you can fast forward. So if we needed to punch in, and then I could start from beat 46. And I could solo just certain tracks, just by swiping across the buttons. And I could solo other tracks just by swiping across the buttons as well. And you can hear the orchestration and the arrangement allows for things like new colors to sort of come in at distinctive parts of the film. So this was all pre-planned. We didn't have the ability to do sort of DAW editing where we can snip things and move things around. It really wasn't possible then. But our imaginations were doing the planning and deciding what was going to work. And then it was an exciting moment when we got to hear it all together. And then the orchestra would come in and, you know, it was either magic or a redo. Most of the time it was magic though. And we learned as we went, and this was all like new at the time, but I think it could be new again. I think it's time to rediscover FM and how to use FM synthesis with analog synthesizers and with live instruments. So that's what I hope I can bring to you through like discovering, you know, this particular video. Thank you for watching all the videos. I really appreciate your comments and want to keep responding to you and offering more of this kind of content. Hope you enjoy it.